Chapter 21 The Little Spider's Dilemma. Peter was running when his spider senses suddenly went off. But in his confused state, he didn't have time to dodge. A gold and red mech rushed toward him, grabbed him around the waist, and carried him forward at high speed for a distance before suddenly throwing Peter to the ground. Peter was thrown around, feeling completely disoriented. The beautiful gold and red mech hovered in midair. Spider-Man was also quite shaken. He took off his mask, and a voice came from the opposite receiver. That guy was right. He really is just a high school kid. Peter angrily slammed his fist on the ground and said, "I'm not a kid. I'm Spider-Man." Stark across from him gave a disdainful snort and said, "Spider-Man? Yeah, you have a good reputation among the gamblers in Hell's Kitchen. The only good thing you've done is help them win a lot of money." Peter's rage was almost skyrocketing. This strange robot attacked him right away, slamming him to the ground and mocking him. Peter angrily lunged forward, but Iron Man's armor drew a graceful arc in the air, dodging the attack. Spider-Man doesn't know any fighting skills, has never fought any robots, and doesn't understand tactical route calculations. So he's completely helpless against the Mark V equipped with Jarvis. Spider-Man roared, "You damn robot! I'll show you what I'm made of." Iron Man landed in his suit and said, "Oh, really? Show me how you beat those lousy underground boxers." Stark's tongue was still sharp. Spider-Man's face flushed red and then turned pale from his mockery. Finally, Stark seemed to lose interest in talking to this little brat Peter any longer, and he said coldly, "If you're still a baby who hasn't been weaned, hurry up and go back home. New York isn't your playground to run around in. Don't think that just because you're a little different from others, you can roam freely in the air of this city. Someone's already watching you." Stark had absolutely no liking for the current Spider-Man, especially after learning that he possessed extraordinary abilities yet only went to fight in underground boxing rings. In his view, this was an extremely foolish act. Stark has his own pride. Although he is somewhat arrogant, stubborn, and sensitive, after experiencing the life-or-death crisis of being kidnapped, the real Iron Man has awakened. Therefore, he looks down on Peter, who is still just fooling around. Peter stood up, angrily throwing the hood to the ground. He said, "You say I'm running around in New York? But aren't you doing the same thing?" His senses returned slightly, so he said to Stark, "Yeah, I can tell from that suit of armor that you're wearing that it's definitely not cheap stuff. You have plenty of money to play with this. But what about me? My uncle and aunt are both in poor health. They can't even afford the medical bills for their checkups. I desperately need money, so why can't I go to the boxing ring and fight? I don't have the ability to hurt anyone." Stark crossed his arms and said, "Have you ever thought that having this ability but not using it to save others is itself a form of harming them?" Peter wore an absurd expression, shaking his head from side to side as if he couldn't believe the person opposite him could say such ridiculous things. He said, "I acquired this ability myself, and I can use it to do whatever I want. It's my ability. So why can't I use it to do more for myself instead of having to help others?" Peter hasn't experienced Ben Parker's death yet, and he doesn't understand the meaning of, "With great power comes great responsibility." So he now believes with a clear conscience that since he has this ability, he should of course seek more benefits for himself. It can only be said that his idea is not wrong. Everyone lives for themselves. But Spider-Man is destined to become a superhero. Peter's inherent kindness and resilience will be gradually brought out as he grows up. He is destined to become a superhero. As for Stark, although he is arrogant and haughty, he always has the idea that he is responsible for the world and its people. He feels that as a super genius, protecting ordinary people and the Earth is his innate responsibility. Stark could tell that Peter's agitation was abnormal, probably because he had just experienced some kind of shock. So he said, "I know you have many questions you can't understand right now, and I used to be too. But there are some things you have to experience firsthand to understand. This is something that no amount of preaching can compare to. I can only tell you that if you continue to hold onto this kind of thinking, you will regret it one day." After saying that, Stark's mech flew away, leaving Peter sitting there dejectedly and disappointed. He really didn't understand why everyone was against him, as if he were a born bad seed. Peter didn't understand why he seemed to be in more pain than before after gaining superpowers. He earned money, but he didn't dare give it directly to Uncle Ben because he was wandering around at night, couldn't sleep well, and his grades had dropped. Moreover, in the excitement of gaining his newfound abilities, he neglected Gwen's feelings, and now Gwen was giving him the cold shoulder. He wanted to beat up his nemesis Thompson, but he didn't dare to fight at school. so he could only swallow his anger. This damn superpower didn't actually bring him any huge benefits, nor did it allow him to turn his life around overnight and live the kind of comfortable life he wanted. He didn't understand where the problem lay. As the cold wind of the New York night blew in, Spider-Man sat on the roof of the Hell's Kitchen building, deep in thought. At that moment, his exceptional hearing allowed him to hear whispers coming from the alley behind the building. It was the back door of a nightclub, where two tall, burly bodyguards were originally standing. Peter could see them from his angle, but they couldn't see Peter. Peter saw a bald man in a jacket, seemingly talking to his men. Peter's eyesight and hearing were far superior to ordinary people. He saw a target-like circular mark on the bald man's forehead, and he heard the bald man say, "As long as we floor the accelerator before he can react, Andre has a good car, he modified it, it accelerates much faster than a regular car. As long as you remain still from the start and don't let him hear you, crash into him the instant he turns the corner, and he's doomed." His subordinate said, "I know a good intersection at the end of Mary Street. There are some construction debris piled up there, and the smell of car oil can be masked." The bald man grinned wickedly and said, "We have to take him down before that woman, so Kingpin will know who his most trusted subordinate is." Peter listened to their conversation from upstairs, only half-heartedly. From their talk, he learned that they seemed to be planning to run someone over with a car. But Peter, who had just been given a lecture, thought rebelliously, "What does this have to do with me? It's just a gang fight. One gang member wants to kill another gang member. Why should I care? Anyway, there aren't any good people in this damn Hell's Kitchen." Peter thought to himself as he slowly walked back. It was already very late, and he told Uncle Ben that he wouldn't be going back tonight. So he returned to Daredevil's cabin, where Daredevil was still fast asleep. Peter thought that perhaps he wasn't entirely right. There was still a good person in Hell's Kitchen, and that was the friend in front of him who was a little too good. Peter looked at the wound on his calf, which was still bleeding a little, while the bruises Peter had just suffered from being thrown by Iron Man had completely healed. Peter suddenly felt a bit absurd. Daredevil really was just an ordinary person, without any self-healing ability like him. That's why he meddled in other people's business and got himself into such a mess. He wanted to learn Daredevil's martial arts, but he had no interest in learning his way of doing things. If he had angrily rushed down to stand up for justice and tell them not to commit murder when he overheard the gang's conversation, he wouldn't have had a peaceful night. There must be at least a dozen bodyguards in the nightclub, and he would have to beat them all down. That bald guy might even be exceptionally tough. With so many people, if he accidentally got hit, it would hurt for quite a while. The result was probably just preventing a gang fight. But what kind of good deed is that? There are no innocent people in Hell's Kitchen. The only ones caught in the crossfire are other gangs. Peter thought, why should he spend an entire night, risking injury, to meddle in such a trivial matter? Thinking this, Peter slowly drifted off to sleep. In his dream, he made a fortune with his abilities and bought a house on the most bustling street in Queens. Uncle Ben and Aunt May moved into the new big house. They even hired a private doctor. Uncle Ben's illness was cured, and Aunt May seemed to have become more than 10 years younger. Their family lived a very wealthy and happy life. The first half of the dream was very pleasant, but perhaps because Peter heard Daredevil's painful groans at night, the second half of the dream took a sharp turn for the worse. While Peter was out, a group of thugs broke into his beautiful house. They killed his uncle and aunt and looted all their belongings. Their neighbors all saw the thugs, but no one called the police. When the police arrived, they were unable to catch the killers immediately. Peter became a wandering ghost, roaming the city every day, trying to find the killer who had shattered his happy life, but without any clues. Finally, in his dream, Daredevil appeared, and Peter questioned Daredevil, asking why he had missed those few criminals when he had fought so many. Daredevil coldly replied, "The only one who can take full responsibility for this is yourself." Peter woke up in a cold sweat. It was just dawn in New York, and the cold air seeped in through the cracks in the window, penetrating his lungs and making him feel like he was going to cry. Daredevil woke up too, and Peter poured him some water. Daredevil said, "Thank you, but I'm afraid I'll have to trouble you again later to go to the clinic at the end of Mary Street and get some medicine for me." Chapter 22 Heroes Are Just Ordinary People, Part 1. Although Peter said he would go get the medicine in a little while, he didn't go until the afternoon because Matt's leg was still bleeding. He had to try several different bandaging methods, and by the time it was all done, it was already afternoon. Peter hadn't had time to eat and was starving. When he arrived at the clinic, he smelled an enchanting fragrance. Schiller heard the doorbell ring and went out to see a big boy in a hoodie standing at the door, sniffing hard as if trying to inhale all the fragrance. Schiller wiped his hands and said, "Come in." Peter scratched his head and said, "Good afternoon, sir. A friend of mine asked me to come here to get some medicine. He said you know him." "Oh, I know," Schiller said. "But he'll have to wait until I finish eating. He probably isn't in a hurry, is he?" Peter said. "Fortunately, his bleeding has stopped, but he's in a lot of pain and needs some painkillers. Have you eaten?" Schiller asked. Peter blushed slightly, thinking that perhaps his gaze toward the kitchen had been too intense, and the doctor had noticed. Schiller said, "If you haven't eaten, stay and have something, or you can take some back for Matt." As it was speaking, a small yellow creature carrying a large bowl ran onto the table. It even twitched its nose vigorously on the bowl, then licked its lips, seemingly unable to wait any longer. Schiller cooked Chinese food: rice, sweet and sour pork ribs, hot and sour shredded potatoes, and a bowl of tomato and egg soup. Peter, who was staring at the table, was too hungry to say no. Since gaining his spider abilities, Peter's appetite has increased significantly, and he gets hungry much more easily. After finishing an entire rice cooker full of rice, Peter was genuinely embarrassed. His ears turned bright red as he put down his bowl and said, "I'm so sorry, doctor. I think I ate all your food. I'll pay." "No need," Schiller said. "I was going to cook another pot of rice anyway. Since I need to take it back to my old friend, there are still some ribs in the pot. You can take them out and put them in the lunchbox in the cupboard for Matt to take back." The little spider ran to the kitchen, not only cooking a new pot of rice, but also washing all the pots and pans clean. Schiller thinks this version of Spider-Man is still quite likable. In contrast, Pikachu ate until his belly was round and full. After finishing, he slumped into his chair and started snoring. Schiller grabbed his lightning bolt-shaped tail and shook it, saying, "Even if someone is in charge of washing the dishes today, it's not an excuse for you to skip work. Go take out the trash." "Oh, sir, I can take it with me," Peter said. "Okay, thank you. Oh, by the way, there's no garbage disposal fee in Hell's Kitchen. Just walk forward. There's a corner with a pile of scrap. Just throw your garbage there." Peter carried 2 large bags of kitchen waste in his hands, turned out of the back door of the clinic, and immediately saw the place Schiller had mentioned. It was a bit far from the clinic, with a huge pile of broken bricks, scrap wood, and other garbage thrown by others. The pile was very high and emitted a strong odor. Beside these piles of garbage were several beggars, all pointing to leftover or unwanted kitchen waste to fill their stomachs. When Spider-Man walked over, the beggars were all on the other side of the junk pile, and he didn't see them. Perhaps he was full, or perhaps Schiller's Chinese food was just too to his liking. Peter's depression vanished. He happily carried 2 bags of garbage, made a short sprint, and with a strong swing of his arm, threw the garbage to the top of the junk pile. "Bingo!" Peter shouted, just like he used to do when he and Uncle Ben went to throw out the trash. They would stand far away and then throw the trash bags hard, hoping they would land right in the trash can. But he hadn't been that strong before, and his uncle always had to clean up his messes. Peter thought that next time he went to throw out the trash, he would definitely show his uncle how strong he was now. He threw the garbage bags up, and one of them broke open. Inside were bones left over from a meal, scraps of meat left over from Schiller's cooking, some uneaten shredded potatoes, and half a sprouted potato. The beggars, however, acted as if they had seen some unparalleled delicacy and tried to snatch them up. The pile of rubble had grown into a small mountain. To climb it, the beggars had to step on broken bricks and planks. The top of the pile was a triangle made up of several large pieces of broken wall. The beggars struggled to climb it, and that's when Peter noticed someone picking up trash. Feeling a little embarrassed, he dashed to the middle of the waste pile, intending to climb to the top and take the trash down. The beggars weren't Spider-Man with mutated abilities. They had been hungry for a long time and had little strength. One of the older women was closest to the top of the mountain, but in her haste, she broke off the piece of scrap she was holding. Without her hand for support, she fell straight backward. Spider-Man had just reached the top of the junkyard when he saw a beggar fall down from the opposite side. He reached out to grab him, but it was too late. This junkyard contains all sorts of things: broken bottles, steel bars, and spiked planks thrown down from the upper floors by drunkards. If you hit any of them, you'd probably lose half your life. Fortunately, Peter had a special ability. He quickly bent down and grabbed the falling beggar. Before he could feel smug, he heard a loud roar, followed by a sharp, piercing screech of brakes and a dull thud as something hit the ground. Blood splattered, and Peter turned his head, looking incredulously at the nearest intersection. The figure that flew out was all too familiar to him. That's Daredevil. A large amount of blood flowed from where he landed, and the heavy smell of blood shrouded the world in front of Peter in a hazy red hue. He rushed down like a madman. Matt was lying there, blood gushing from his eyes, nose, and mouth. His spine was twisted into a grotesque shape, as if it were broken. But he wasn't dead yet. He was completely immobile after losing the nerves connecting him to his brain. Peter was trembling all over. Without thinking, he quickly picked Matt up and rushed into Schiller's clinic through the back door, yelling, "Doctor! Doctor! Someone here needs treatment." Schiller knew as soon as he saw Matt that he had probably been attacked by the same people who were trying to assassinate him. He said, "The garage is right next door. Put him in the car and get him to the Presbyterian hospital right away. With such severe injuries, only the best hospitals have a slim chance of saving the patient." Schiller sped recklessly through the streets of Manhattan, managing to get Matt to Presbyterian Hospital as fast as he could. He had some influence at the hospital, and Matt was quickly admitted to the emergency room. However, the attending physician soon told them with a serious expression, "The chances of saving this gentleman are slim. Unfortunately, he is no longer able to write a will or make a verbal will. If you are his relatives, perhaps you can go and see him one last time." Peter was on the verge of a breakdown. Everything was piecing together in his mind. He really hadn't expected that the person the gangsters wanted to murder that day was the only good person in all of Hell's Kitchen, Daredevil Matt. He couldn't accept that he was the one who caused all of this. He thought that if he had killed those gangsters when he heard about it, or even just told Matt about it, he would have been much more careful. If he doesn't stay at the clinic for lunch, but instead picks up his medication and leaves immediately, Matt won't come looking for him. If he hadn't been so playful and hadn't thrown those 2 trash bags so high, he might have had time to tackle Matt the moment the car sped off. He had so many opportunities to save his friends, but he still failed to do anything. Daredevil is about to die, and Peter can't accept this fact at all. Schiller remained calm and asked the attending physician, "Where is his problem primarily? Cardiopulmonary function, neurosurgery, or abdominal trauma?" The doctor shook his head and said, "No, it's not that. There's a problem with his spine. The nerves probably can't be reattached. Even if we can barely save his life, he'll never be able to move again." Schiller took a deep breath and said, "I just want to know if there's any way to save him." The doctor hesitated for a moment and said, "Perhaps Dr. Strange has a way. He is the best neurosurgeon here, and perhaps only he can reconnect so many nerves." Schiller immediately turned around and said, "Peter, I'm going to find someone who can save Matt now, but you have to stay here. Matt has been taken to the hospital, but those who want to kill him won't let it go. After I leave, you have to make sure no one goes into the operating room. I'll be back as fast as I can." After saying that, he left immediately. Peter, trembling all over, kept repeating, "No one will go into the operating room. No one will go into the operating room. I won't let anyone in." After leaving the hospital, Schiller called Pepper directly and said, "I would like to get the home address of a doctor named Strange." Pepper didn't ask him why. Soon, he received an address on his phone. It was not far from the Presbyterian Hospital and was the most upscale apartment in the vicinity. Schiller activated Blink and arrived at the apartment building at top speed. He didn't take the elevator or knock on the door. Instead, he used several consecutive blinks that could pass through walls to appear behind Strange, who was having afternoon tea. Strange heard a noise, turned around, and found a cane pressed against his Adam's apple. "Listen, I don't have time to waste with you. A friend of mine is seriously injured and is currently being treated at the Presbyterian Hospital. You are the best neurosurgeon there. Grab your things and go perform the surgery right now." Strange gave a ridiculous look. Schiller released his grip on the cane, but it still floated in midair, pointing directly at Strange. Strange raised his hands and stepped back. No one was holding the cane, but it was still pressed against his neck. Schiller reached into the air, and Strange's coat, which was hanging on the hanger, flew towards him. Strange stared wide-eyed at the scene in disbelief. Schiller threw the coat back at him and said, "I think you understand that you have no right to refuse now. Come with me immediately." Chapter 23 Heroes Are Just Ordinary People, Part 2. Strange swallowed hard, looking into Schiller's gray eyes. He didn't have the courage to refuse, because anyone with a brain could see that Schiller was no ordinary person. Strange was dragged into the car, but he still said, "I want to tell you first that I am a doctor, not God. If your friend is already dead, no matter how much you threaten me, I can't bring him back to life." Schiller drove on without expression, saying, "We're both doctors. I know that better than you do. I came to you because I'm sure you can save him." Strange breathed a sigh of relief, but still frowned and said stubbornly, "You're just a psychologist. You'd better not jump to conclusions about neurosurgery." Before he could finish speaking, he saw a ballpoint pen pressed against his forehead again. Schiller's hands were busy driving, while the pen just floated there quietly. Strange made a zipping motion with his mouth, indicating that he would definitely not speak anymore. On the other side, Spider-Man stood at the door of the operating room, overwhelmed with guilt and self-reproach, not wanting to let even a fly in. But Matt's ex-girlfriend, Erica, also sneaked to the door of the operating room. Erica wasn't there to kill Matt. On the contrary, she knew about the group's plan even before Peter did. He had been trying to find an opportunity to tell Matt, but Matt left in such a hurry that Erica only arrived after the incident. Her feelings for Matt were complicated. They were classmates and lovers, but broke up due to some irreconcilable conflicts. This time, Erica accepted Kingpin's commission to assassinate Matt, but she held back at every turn and never really intended to kill Matt. However, she lost her sight of him for a moment, and Matt was ambushed by someone else. How could she not be anxious? Erica comes from a wealthy family and is not unsophisticated. She knows that Matt is seriously injured and in critical condition. Without the help of some mystical power, he probably cannot be saved. She has to take action. Perhaps only the power of the beast can save Matt's life. Erica used her ninja escape technique to walk to the operating room door. She didn't take the high school-aged man in front of her seriously at all. After observing him for a few days, she knew that Peter was just a high school student who didn't know any fighting skills. Erica planned to just walk past him and go in. Coincidentally, Peter possesses the superpower of spiders, the most important of which is spider sense. At this moment, he is under high tension, and his spider sense is several times more sensitive than before. As soon as Erica approached, Peter turned his head and stared intently at the air in the corner. He sensed that someone was there, and he swung his fist at Erica. Erica knew Peter's strength was extraordinary, so she didn't dare to take the attack head-on. However, Peter's movements were full of flaws. He hadn't received professional training, and when he threw the punch, his upper body leaned too far forward while his legs weren't spread apart, and he couldn't maintain his balance. Erica's arm wrapped around Peter's wrist and pulled him forward. Peter instantly lost his balance and fell forward. Erica tripped over Peter, and he fell to the ground. But perhaps his anxiety triggered Peter to use his powers. The moment he landed, he sprang up and grabbed Erica's lower back tightly with his arm. Erica was also very anxious, and both of them were very angry. But Erica was, after all, a female assassin trained by the hand. As soon as Peter hugged her, she swung her other hand, which was holding a dagger, backwards fiercely. The short knife with a blade of air slashed from Peter's shoulder down to below his last rib, nearly severing half of his body. In an instant, an overwhelming pain engulfed Peter, almost unleashing his full potential. With a burst of strength, he flung Erica away, sending her crashing down the other side of the corridor, where she remained unable to get up for a long time. Peter slumped down, feeling like he was dying from the pain. The dagger had not only sliced open half of his back, but the blade had also cut into his lung. Now, every time he breathed, blood rushed up his trachea. Peter felt pain like this for the first time. The excruciating pain of his entire back muscles being torn apart almost made him faint. He's just a high school student. The worst pain he's ever experienced in his life was being punched a few days ago, which is nothing compared to the injuries he's suffering now. His entire back was almost pierced, and his lungs were also injured, making his breath taste bloody. Each breath was accompanied by immense pain, and Peter's tears flowed naturally as he squeezed out painful groans from his throat. He suddenly realized that heroes also get hurt and bleed. Furthermore, heroes also experience excruciating pain when injured, and their injuries don't heal at all. They are not spared because of any special abilities they possess. His healing ability made him feel better in a few breaths. He glanced vaguely into the operating room and, through the frosted glass, he could see Daredevil lying there. Daredevil tilted his head, his eyes open. He was still conscious, but unable to move. Peter knew that Daredevil had no healing factor and that he was about to die. He was just a blind man who knew martial arts, and now his entire spine is broken. He must be in a lot of pain, even more pain than me, but he can't make a sound. Peter felt horrified and desperate, heartbroken and angry at the fragility of a hero's life, and more importantly, overwhelmed by immense guilt and self-reproach. An ordinary person without superpowers saved him by fighting against an underground boxing ring, but when he overheard the criminals plotting, he felt it was none of his business and left, causing his friend, a true hero, to suffer so much pain and even die. Matt is the real hero, but he isn't. This intense emotion made his spider sense buzz. In an instant, Peter's spider abilities were amplified to the maximum. That intense emotion surged in his heart, and in his eyes, the whole world changed. Erica instantly activated her stealth technique to hide herself, but Peter's eyes were red-rimmed, and he instantly fixed his gaze on her location. The clumsy boy opposite her vanished almost instantly. Then, a tremendous force slammed Erica against the wall. She coughed up blood and used her last strength to escape using a teleportation technique. When Schiller returned to the hospital, he saw Peter sitting blankly under a crumbling wall, his eyes red-rimmed. Strange went into the operating room. By then, it was completely dark. Schiller stood opposite Spider-Man. "Peter, I never expected our meeting to take place under these circumstances," Schiller said. Peter was a little slow to react. He didn't understand what Schiller meant. Schiller squatted down, looked into Peter's eyes and said, "I'm sorry I couldn't be with you for that physical exam. As you can see, I no longer work at this hospital." Peter regained some of his senses and said, "It's you're the doctor." He clearly remembered the doctor he had been chatting with online. Schiller said, "Yes, it's me." Peter lowered his head in silence and said, "I must have disappointed you. I'm not as good as I seemed when we were talking. I've done a lot of wrong things and almost killed my friend." Schiller said, "I think you've already figured some things out." Yes, Peter said in a hoarse voice. "I understand the biggest truth. Being injured really hurts. It hurts so much, but he still did it," Peter whispered. "He's a hero and I'm not. Maybe I never will be a hero." Schiller's voice remained calm, and Peter could not detect a trace of blame in his tone. He simply said peacefully, "Perhaps you have already realized that if capable people in this world do not save others, then no one will save you. You may feel that your life is not good now, but even this bad life is built for you by people who are willing to give. Even their beggar-like lives were only possible after Daredevil cleared out the thugs on that street." "Peter, perhaps I shouldn't be the one to say this, but now I'm afraid only I can do it," Schiller said. "With great power comes great responsibility." Spider-Man silently closed his eyes. Just in the early hours of the morning, in the darkest hour, Strange took off his gloves and walked out of the operating room, saying, "Congratulations, the surgery was a success. There's an 80% chance his nerves will fully recover." Upon hearing this, Peter finally let out a roar, as if to vent all the emotions that had been building up in his chest. He jumped out of the window, quickly climbed up the building's walls to the roof, and then began to traverse the rooftops of New York City at breakneck speed. Then he saw the gold and red mech again, as if it was trying to lead him somewhere, circling around him. Peter followed the mech, and they jumped and raced all the way to the New York TV tower. The two stood at the very top of the New York television tower. Peter tried desperately to roar, but no sound came out. All his emotions were stuck in his chest, and he was going crazy. Stark's visor rose up, and Peter saw his face, exclaiming in surprise, "You're Stark! Iron Man is Stark! This is not surprising, son. Who else but the owners of Stark Industries could develop such a mech?" Stark said, "But the news says you were kidnapped and taken to Afghanistan." "Yes, but do you want to know how I got out?" Peter looked at him, and Stark said, "I built an energy core and installed it here." Stark pointed to his chest. "There is still an arc reactor here. In a cave in Afghanistan, I cut open my chest and stuffed a metal object inside. My own blood soaked my pants." Just imagining the scene made Peter's chest ache. He said, "That must feel terrible." "Of course, it hurt," Stark said, trying to sound casual, but Peter could hear a tremor in his voice, as if he didn't want to recall that day. "You're going to cut open your chest cavity with a not-so-sharp bone knife, and then sew the wire into your flesh." Peter felt a chill run down his spine. He really didn't expect that Stark, who always appeared in the news as a playboy, this seemingly wealthy man who lived an extremely comfortable and carefree life, had also experienced such a painful past. He had also shed a lot of blood and experienced pain that most people could hardly bear. "Although I always like to call myself a genius, I am very clear-headed," I know that if I am hit by a bullet, I will bleed a lot. If shrapnel shatters my heart, I will die. If I lose a leg, I will also be unable to walk. But I've done a lot of jobs with that kind of risk. Am I looking for thrills? Stark said. I am the richest person in the world, and I have power that most people in the world do not have. I have absolutely no need to wear my expensive mech to save ordinary people who can't even afford a single screw on my body with a month's salary, let alone take such a big risk. Spider-Man closed his eyes, remained silent for a moment, and then said, with great power comes great responsibility, right? Stark didn't answer. He simply pointed to his heart. Peter understood what he meant. He thought he had already given himself the answer. As the New York City sun rose, Peter and Stark stood atop the television tower, watching the golden rays pierce the clouds and bathe all of New York's buildings in a brilliant gold. From this day forward, Peter Parker, Spider-Man, has learned a lesson. So-called heroes are also ordinary people. They feel pain, get hurt, bleed, feel lonely and confused. The only difference between them and ordinary people on the ground is that they have a sense of responsibility that ordinary people do not have, and a great determination to uphold justice to the death. No one in this world is born able to withstand such intense pain. As they walk through the darkness, they forge the bones and blood etched with agony into a sturdy armor on their bodies. And when dawn breaks, they use this hardened body to save the world. When Spider-Man first stood up from the iron frame of the TV tower, he wasn't wearing the Spider-Man suit yet, and he wasn't that tall and strong, but his soul stood up and became upright. The surging emotions in his chest transformed into a force that spread from his wounds throughout his body. As the first rays of sunlight greeted him, he thought, it's dawn. It's time to save the world. When a complete storyline is encountered, it will be updated all at once without any buffering. Chapter 24: God of Cursing. Although Matt was rescued, he is still not out of danger and is under observation in the intensive care unit. Schiller said to Strange, Dr. Strange, I owe you a favor. If you ever need any help in the future, feel free to come to me. Strange looked unwell. After all, he had been brought here in the afternoon and had been performing surgery for almost 10 hours straight. He said impatiently, God help me. I don't want to see you again, you weirdo. Schiller said, I believe you have already witnessed my abilities, so I'll add a piece of advice. Be careful when you drive. Strange said, don't play these weird tricks on me. I'm going back to sleep. After saying that, he left. Schiller shrugged. He knew he couldn't change Dr. Strange's fate. In Strange's current state, he wouldn't listen to anything. But it doesn't matter. When he begs and pleads for treatment for his arm injury, he will naturally think of Schiller. After returning to the clinic and getting a good night's sleep, Schiller woke up to find that he had been given 2 more opportunities for random chats, indicating that he had once again had a significant impact on 2 important characters in the story. One should be Daredevil, Matt, and the other should be Spider-Man. Schiller planned to use it once first. Now it seemed that his ability really needed to be strengthened. After witnessing Daredevil Matt's accident, he felt that his defense and dodging abilities were still not strong enough, especially his reaction speed. Even if he could teleport, no one could say that they could react in a fraction of a second. Relying on the unreliable spider sense was not an option. Schiller then opened the chat system and used a random chat. Soon, his chat partner arrived, but strangely, this time the profile picture was a bit odd. The profile picture frame was completely black, with only 2 eyes seemingly shining. As soon as the communication was connected, Schiller heard a string of words he couldn't understand coming from the other end. Previously, all his chat partners spoke English, and even when GUI communicated with him directly via telepathy, the meaning was easy to understand. But this time he encountered a chatterbox who was talking incoherently, and Schiller couldn't understand a word of it. He tapped the system and said, Can't the chat system translate? What language is the other person speaking? Because of Schiller's past life experiences, he had visited, toured, and exchanged ideas at various universities. In addition to English and Chinese, he also knew some languages of European countries. However, the language spoken by the other party seemed to be completely different from any of these languages. Schiller had never heard of such a language before. The system replied with a single line, The chat system will automatically translate any language spoken by the chat partner. If there is still content that cannot be understood, it means that the host and the other party have differences in life form, or that understanding the other party's language requires a special brain organ. Schiller then realized that the other party was definitely not human. The long string of unintelligible sounds he emitted might require a specific brain organ to receive them. It was not language, but more like a signal. Schiller was a human and probably did not have this kind of brain organ as his kind, so naturally he could not understand what he was saying. Schiller pointed to the portrait and saw that, sure enough, several words were clearly written on it. Nar, the god of symbiotes. He never expected that this random connection would actually link to Nar. The symbiote god has been described in great detail in the Venom series of comics. In short, he is an ancient being who has existed since the beginning of the universe, the Lord of the Abyss. He forged a weapon called the Black Death Sword, cut off the head of a celestial, and then began to wreak havoc on other civilizations in the universe. He developed a method for creating dark creatures, namely the split symbiote, and he roamed the universe with his army of symbiotes and the Dragon Legion he created. Until one day, he ordered the symbiote army to attack Earth, and was then struck by lightning by Thor, leaving him completely disoriented and disconnected from most of the symbiotes he had created. Most of the symbiotes are scattered throughout the universe, possessing various life forms, many of which are kind and rational aliens. This made the symbiotes realize that their creators' actions of destroying civilizations were evil, so they collectively rebelled. After their rebellion, the symbiotes imprisoned their creator, the symbiote god Nar, on a remote and desolate planet, the so-called symbiote homeworld. Schiller wasn't in a hurry to use the next chat opportunity. Instead, he began to study what Nar was saying with great interest. From the moment the connection started, Nar kept sending long, incomprehensible syllables at high speed. The setting here is more reasonable. It's not like in the comics where everyone in the universe speaks English, and Schiller can't understand a word the symbiote god says. But the symbiote god keeps going on, and Schiller actually manages to figure out some patterns. After Schiller repeatedly confirmed with him, he finally understood what the god of symbiosis meant. He was cursing. That's right. Although not everyone in the universe speaks English, all beings in the universe use roughly the same tone when they swear, and they frequently use certain profanity-laden words. The symbiotic god is an example of this. Schiller heard the syllable Natalu repeatedly appear in the symbiote god's angry tone, and he guessed that it must be a swear word in the symbiote race's language that starts with the letter F. So when the symbiote god finished his long rant, he casually said, Natalu. An eerie silence fell over the other end. After years of cursing, this is the first time the god of symbiotes has been cursed back at by the street. Schiller's guess was spot on. The word was indeed a swear word in the language of the symbiote god. The symbiote god retaliated with an even angrier string of words, but Schiller remained calm and simply replied, Natalu. After hearing it so many times, Schiller also learned several other swear words, and even imitated the trill and pronunciation exactly. The god of symbiotes kept sending long, rambling messages, and Schiller would often pick out a few words from those messages to hurl insults back. Anyway, the symbiote god can't come over and attack him through the internet. So what if the Lord of the Abyss killed the Celestials? As he cursed at the symbiotic god, he recalled the origin story of this ancient creature. The symbiotic god is quite unlucky. Regardless of whether it's good or bad, the scum that fell from his own body betrayed him and locked himself up. He also imprisoned their creator on a separate planet, and judging from the current situation, he has been imprisoned for a long time. It's not hard to understand why he cursed. If it were Schiller, Schiller would have cursed too. Schiller then began to study the ability to replicate the symbiote god, but he was actually a little hesitant. He estimated that the symbiote god's ability was to create symbiotes, but Schiller did not want that ability. He clicked on the profile picture and found that the 4 characters for copy ability had turned red, with a parenthesis appearing next to it that read, the other party's ability is mutating. Please copy with caution. This was the first time Schiller had discovered this phenomenon. This all begins with the origin story of the symbiotic god. After being imprisoned, the symbiote god was no pushover and naturally tried to escape. Schiller arrived at the perfect time. Not long after the symbiote god devised this plan, Schiller made contact with him. The symbiote god is a very ancient being. While it's uncertain whether it was the first being in Universe 7, it was certainly one of the earlier ones. His strength comes more from his talent. His mind isn't actually that sharp. He can think of ways to escape not through intelligence, but by utilizing his unique nature. Schiller didn't read much of this part of the comics in his previous life, but he knew that the symbiote god created offspring with different abilities. Some very strong, some very weak. Some symbiote offspring possess special abilities, and the symbiote god intends to exploit this characteristic. He plans to create a special symbiote, one that will not have a physical form but will instead become a conscious cloud of smoke. When he transfers his consciousness into this offspring's body, he can break free from the constraints of the planetary cage. Honestly, this isn't a very clever solution, and it might not even be able to get him off there. But with the symbiote god imprisoned on a lonely planet, what else can he do but find something to kill time? So his daily routine consists of only two things: cursing and having babies. Just as he created this new offspring and was preparing to transfer his consciousness, Schiller connected with him. This is why the symbiote god's abilities were mutating, as he was transferring his consciousness into the new body, and his abilities were becoming the new body's abilities. Generally speaking, if it's a symbiote god like Schiller, it's like a spider that hasn't been bitten yet. Schiller can hardly replicate his abilities. The symbiote god originally fought in the universe using the powerful living abyss Black Death sword. Later, his ability to split dark creatures came from his original nature. It was an ability that suddenly appeared after his defeat and fall, and it didn't have any source. These are things Schiller cannot replicate, and even if he could, he wouldn't bother replicating that ability. Why would he cut himself into pieces? Besides, those fragments might even unite and betray him, which is just too unreliable. So Schiller didn't hesitate to choose to copy the ability that was mutating. If the ability was invisibility or damage avoidance, Schiller would be in luck. Even if it was like Venom with considerable power or turned into something like a suit of armor, it would still be good. Symbiotic Fog, special ability, has been loaded. Schiller suddenly felt that he had gained another perspective. He was still using his eyes, but it was not him who was using them. The signals received from his eyes were still transmitted to his brain. It's as if he directly copied a symbiote. No, it seems a little different. The system's ability to copy doesn't bring Schiller any external objects, nor can it copy the opponent's equipment or other physical items. For example, if Schiller were to replicate Iron Man's abilities, he might gain Stark's genius intellect or his ability to develop equipment, but he wouldn't be able to obtain a finished mech like the Mark V. The system can only copy the capabilities of the chat partner themselves, not external aspects of them. Schiller felt as if a bewildered soul had been stuffed into his body. But it wasn't an external object. It was still himself. The symbiote hadn't become something like Venom that could detach from its host at any time. Instead, it had become a part of Schiller. Simply put, it became the ability that the system loaded onto Schiller, becoming a part of Schiller. Like other abilities that Schiller obtained from the system, it cannot be separated from Schiller. If Schiller dies, it will also perish, cannot escape, and it is impossible for it to have a second host. However, it also possesses some characteristics of a symbiote. For example, it can think. Schiller could sense that an area of his brain seemed to have been altered, and the symbiote had become an organ of his brain. Their communication was more like a dialogue between one personality and another. This symbiote is indeed very special. Schiller will understand later that the god of symbiotes added even more ambition when creating it. After being copied by the system made further modifications to the symbiote in order to integrate the characteristics of the symbiote with the characteristics of the system's loading capabilities. This resulted in it becoming a life form that is perhaps unique in the entire universe, and also an incredibly powerful life form. Chapter 25: The Symbiotic Reproductive System. The symbiote's learning speed is astonishing. Schiller had just copied this ability, and only an afternoon had passed when the other voice in his head could communicate with him using clear brainwaves. Although it could only express some emotions briefly, it was already quite remarkable. After being able to communicate with the symbiote, Schiller planned to test his abilities. He thought the symbiote was similar to Venom. He thought that as long as he shouted "mask," like in the movies, a sticky thing would come out and wrap around him. With two big white eyes, a mouthful of sharp teeth, and a long tongue, the symbiote could directly sense the images Schiller was imagining. It transmitted a series of denials through its brainwaves and kept repeating one sentence in Schiller's mind. "I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky, I won't be sticky." It seems that he sensed that Schiller didn't quite like the sticky feeling of the symbiote. To be honest, Schiller just didn't want to hurt the newborn little guy, since he would be his right-hand man in the future. Schiller didn't actually dislike the sticky texture of the symbiote. He just couldn't stand it. No matter how powerful the symbiote is, its texture, like a pile of mud, is truly terrifying. Seemingly eager to prove it wasn't sticky, the gray mist, having just learned to communicate, controlled Schiller's body and stood up before he could react. In an instant, Schiller found that the world he saw had changed. He lost his eyes, or rather, he lost his entire physical body, but gained thousands upon thousands of sensors. Schiller found that he could suddenly clearly sense every detail of everything in the clinic bedroom. These signals kept entering his brain, but they were not images he saw, but sensations he felt. His eyesight was far from good enough to see the details of every fiber in the blanket, but he could feel it now. At first, each sensor sent a large amount of information, which his brain couldn't process at all. But soon, this information was quickly processed by his other thinking organ, the symbiote, and fed back to Schiller's brain. So much detail gave Schiller a sense of control over everything. Schiller then discovered that he seemed to be able to control the state, so he began to schedule the work of all the sensors, spreading them out as much as possible. Until these sensors were placed on the full-length mirror in the bedroom, Schiller saw that he had turned into a cloud of gray mist. That's right, he lost his entire body and turned into a wisp of drifting mist. Every factor in the fog became his sensor. Thousands upon thousands of symbiotic factors quickly wove together a vast information-gathering network, leaving no detail unchecked. As long as the factors could enter, there were no secrets to Schiller. For example, Schiller could even see the arrangement of iron elements in an electric kettle. If he concentrated, he could also sense the distribution of oxygen in the air and the presence of other rare gases. This ability to observe at the molecular level, even approaching the atomic level, made the world seem more magnificent and wonderful than Schiller, as a human being, could observe. Thank God, you're not one of those symbiotic, mud-like things, Schiller thought. Gray mist seemed to feel praised, and he exuded a happy emotion. As if to further demonstrate his power, he directly controlled Schiller, and the mist he had become dispersed. The gray fog stopped gathering together and began to spread out evenly like ordinary fog, soon enveloping Hell's Kitchen in a hazy mist. Many factors became more distant, but they continued to transmit all sorts of information to Schiller's brain. As the scope expanded, this information increased by hundreds or thousands. However, with the symbiote helping him process it, Schiller could easily focus his attention on a certain part. For example, he could even sense that 5 or 6 blocks away, in the heart of Hell's Kitchen, gangs were fighting. He could even feel the marks left by every bullet during the firefight. He focused his attention, trying to find a bald man with a target pattern on his forehead. The gray fog locked onto him in an instant, even transmitting all the microscopic elemental information about his environment back to Schiller's brain. This ability was so powerful that no one could escape Schiller's eyes in any foggy place. Schiller felt that if it were his own brain processing so much complex information, he would probably go crazy on the spot. But this symbiote seemed to have this ability innately. In a thick fog, the information transmitted back by each factor can be classified, filtered, and concentrated by him at an extremely fast speed. In a very short process, Schiller only needs to focus his attention on what he wants to know, and he will naturally know it. He was like someone playing a simulation game from God's perspective, able to observe every movement in the fog at any time, and no detail could escape the penetration of the fog factor. In addition, this magical factor can penetrate into the interior of an object and cause damage, such as destroying stable molecular structures and turning the object into powder in an instant. But the gray fog told him that this ability only applies to things with stable molecular structures and cannot be interfered with by any other force. Otherwise, it would also be unable to exert its influence. But that's already a powerful ability. When he regains his human form, Schiller can choose to gather his body in any foggy place. In other words, within the range that the gray fog can cover, he can disappear in one place an unlimited number of times and then suddenly reappear in another place. However, this cannot completely replace Blink because the process of transforming into gray mist, the gray mist dispersing, condensing, and then transforming back into human form takes a certain amount of time and is not as quick as Blink. Things have temporarily calmed down on the Marvel side. Daredevil Matt is recovering, while Spider-Man wants to follow Stark and learn how to be a superhero. Unfortunately, he has final exams coming up and needs to catch up on his missed lessons, so he doesn't have much time to wander around anymore. Stark is fed up with Nick Fury's baldness and has been hiding in the lab tinkering with mechs lately, rarely going out. So Schiller took a nap and returned to the DC universe. Not long after returning to DC, Schiller discovered a troublesome aspect of the symbiote within him. Back in the DC universe, Schiller is organizing his equipment. Due to Jonathan's arrest, he doesn't have much fear gas left. Fortunately, he had almost wiped out Jonathan's stockpile beforehand, and the fear gas he has left is all concentrated and of high quality. He was taking out the remaining fear gas, diluting it, and preparing to put it into a spray bottle for his use. The fear gas had no effect on Schiller, so unlike Jonathan, he didn't need to cover himself up completely during experiments. The only two living things in his apartment, Schiller and Pikachu, were not afraid of the fear gas, so Schiller didn't care about leaking it during experiments. In addition, he had no background in chemistry education. When he was doing dilutions, he would violate about 200 laboratory rules per minute. Not wearing gloves or gas masks was the least of his worries. Therefore, after he finished, the room would be filled with a low concentration of toxic fumes. This time was no different. After a series of extremely non-standard chemical dilution operations, Schiller barely managed to dispense the fear gas into different spray bottles. But then, a series of excited signals suddenly came to his mind. This is delicious. This is delicious. This is delicious. This is delicious. Give me some. Give me some. Give me some food. Eat. 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 Schiller was stunned. Was this symbiote saying that fear gas tasted good? He suddenly thought of the symbiote concept in the comics, especially the Venom concept. The reason Venom can eat chocolate to replace human brains is because they all contain something called phenylethylamine. This is a chemical that excites the brain. It is found in both the human brain and chocolate. Could it be that the fear gas is also present? Schiller thought about it and realized that it was indeed very possible. Fear gas could induce the deepest fears in people's brains and also suddenly activate people's negative emotions. It was hard to say whether Jonathan used this chemical when making the gas. Now it seems that he not only used it but also used quite a lot of it. How do you want to eat? Schiller asked in his mind. The symbiote didn't seem to understand either. All it knew was that the thing in front of it was very attractive to it. Schiller had no choice but to take out a bottle of diluted fear gas and spray it into his nose. He instantly felt the symbiote in his mind become excited, constantly shouting in his head, "Delicious, delicious, delicious, delicious. Not enough, not enough, not enough, not enough. I want more, I want more, I want more." Well, Schiller thought the symbiotes must have big appetites, so he simply took out a small bottle of undiluted, still liquid fear gas and poured it into his mouth and drank it down. This thing didn't have much of a smell, but in an instant, he could feel the symbiote inside him, which seemed to be excited to the point of being a little delirious. He sent a long string of brainwaves that Schiller couldn't understand at all, and then shouted in Schiller's mind with all the words he had just learned. Finally, after a while, a fog began to permeate Schiller's surroundings. It was darker than ordinary gray fog and had turned somewhat black. Schiller smelled it and thought it might be the gas of fear. Well, Schiller thought it seems that high concentrations of fear gas are like strong liquor to the symbiote. The gray fog got drunk right away. Moreover, when the symbiote got drunk, its reaction was somewhat similar to that of a human. It first went on a drunken rampage, spouting a lot of nonsense, and then vomited. The fog surrounding Schiller must have been the vomit of the gray fog after it got drunk. Gray fog recovered quickly, but after recovering, he still wanted to ask Schiller for a drink, which Schiller refused sternly. But he was clearly not giving up, whining and complaining in Schiller's mind, looking very aggrieved. Schiller was exasperated. How did his symbiote become such a drunkard?